Alrighty then, chat room. Look at that happy, cheerful face.
I'd like to open with a story. I come from a big, close-knit family. Like, I'd pick up a gun and go to war for these guys if I needed to, and I'm pretty sure they'd do the same thing for me. Now, our interests don't really align, but that's hardly an issue. What I'm saying is I've got good people in my life, and if asked to trade them for anything, I'd kill the man who asked. That being said, there's some things I have a lot of enthusiasm for. So at one point, I sat them all down and had them watch Silent Voice. And before I tell you how this ends, let me explain what my dad is like. Papa Gil is one of the smartest, most passionate, and insightful people I know. He's taught me so much about music, movies, TV, history, and whatever else have you. He has a very keen sense for artistic merit. So when I tell you that he got to the final scene of A Silent Voice and said, in the most dispassionate voice he could muster, "Well, I'm glad he got all that stuff off those guys' faces," it wasn't because he was incapable of understanding how the story worked. It was simply because watching an anime with cutesy pastel character designs was too much of a hurdle for him to clear. Shocker, a man with 4 grandkids struggled to engage with the movie as anything more than an unfocused procession of shapes, colors, and sounds. Anyway, on an unrelated note, here's Fuko Ibuki. Now, contrary to what it may seem, especially with how I treated her in the previous video, I don't hate Fuko. I don't even dislike her. She's good people. But at the same time, I get it. She's a character that acts like this in a show that looks like this. I understand that's a bit much for some people to stomach, but I think she adds a lot more than she takes away. I mentioned in part 1 how Clannad has a tendency to plant mind worms in the brains of people who are susceptible to its influence, and Fuko really epitomizes it. Long time ago, I worked at a thrift store, and one day someone dropped off a star-shaped pillow and I just stood there for like 2 minutes muttering, "Actually, it's a starfish. Actually, 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 you will know you have gone too far when you start seeing Fuko in places where you should never see Fuko. Actually, it's a starfish. Actually, it's a starfish. Wait, they had the same voice actors. This was on purpose. I know there's something happening over there. I know you're in my walls. I'm gonna find you. Uh-oh. So, Fuko then, what's her deal? Well, in the game, Fuko's story is an offshoot of Nagisa's. Stuff like this is kind of a hallmark of old visual novels. Newer ones have their choices be either essential to getting the ending you want or completely inconsequential. But older games especially worked more like adventure games where there's a lot more flexibility in how even one specific story route could play out. I mean, come on, do you think in Amakano 3 they'll let you drop everything you're doing to play laser tag in the school? Of course not! That would take valuable resources that could be better spent on even more Hot Springs events! You have a problem, dude! Because I have a problem too! You can actually go through Fuko's route while dating Nagisa. I opted not to do that for my playthrough, but you can do it. In fact, this structure leads to a lot of unintentional comedy. There are a lot of scenes where Tomoya and Nagisa are having a moment and Tomoya just cuts it off midway to bully Fuko, which is sort of where I think some people's complaints come in. Because a lot of the time in her story is dedicated to these weird comedic vignettes, Fuko feels a bit like a gag character. Wait, she's still holding it. Did she trick shot it off the principal's head and then catch it again? That's incredible. So when the time comes to ramp up the stakes, the change in tone can be a bit jarring. Of course, that's how I imagine other people might feel. I actually think it's pretty easy to enjoy both halves of her story. Reading it from Tomoya's perspective as he slowly descends into madness is, let's say, an unforgettable experience. In addition, I think Fuko's a pretty endearing character. Fundamentally simple, granted, but endearing. I think the game does a better job of emphasizing the more sincere aspects of her personality. And in turn, that also helps better characterize Tomoya. Internal monologuing is a staple of visual novel storytelling. In a lot of games, it's just, whoa, geez, I don't know if she likes me. I hope I didn't say something stupid. But for Clannad, it shows Tomoya to be an exceptional judge of character. When he's invested in someone else's struggle, he develops an ability to understand that character inside and out. Which brings me to the structure of these videos. Part 1 was more of a beat-for-beat summary of the first 4 episodes of the TV show, with a whole lot of background information. But I don't think that's going to work for what I want to do from here on out. I want to show the story from every possible angle, because I want to show it to everyone else in the best light that I can. Some things that the game does better, some things that the show does better, and the goals that both versions of the story strive toward. Which brings us to our first big moment for comparison. But let's recap the current situation. Angie Boy, Sick Girl, Drama Club, Rice Snacks, Murder Sunahara, Ghost, Wooden Stars, Teacher, Wedding. Okay, we're all caught up. Because about half the runtime in Fuko's ending is devoted to Nagisa, things that happen very early on in the anime actually occur several dozens of hours into the game. So the scene that happens at the very beginning of episode 5 would actually take place after episode 15 if it were following the game's chronology. Which makes this little line where Coco, alright, her name is Coco Ibuki, asks Nagisa if Tomoya is her boyfriend, much more interesting in its proper context, because depending on how you got here, Tomoya can actually answer yes to this question. But the point of this conversation is actually to establish a few things. At this point, Tomoya is pretty skeptical about this whole ghost rumor, and that
本当は私結婚するかどうかはわからないんです。妹がそういう状態なのに自分だけ結婚して幸せになってしまっていいのか決心がつかなくて。
Tomoya thinks that if the Fuko he knows meets Coco during the Founders Festival, then that should solve everything, even though Fuko seems pretty adamant against it. Which brings me to another big thing brought about by the change in the story structure. In the game, the Founders Festival is your big time limit. If you don't manage to lock into a story route by then, it's game over. And by this point, you've been doing a lot for Nagisa. So to see her dropping her plans to help Fuko out comes across as a much bigger deal in the game than it is in the anime. Because after that, there's no going back. There's not enough time left to reform the drama club at that point. In fact, this wacky scene from episode 6 is actually meant to settle a dispute between whether or not the group decides they want to keep forming the drama club or to pivot to helping out Fuko. Nonetheless, you can't exactly have a little girl, corporeal or otherwise, spending every day sleeping at the school.
A worm crawled up my arm and rested on my neck. When he whispered into my ear, I felt a tingle. He told me how to make a weapon that would help us against our enemies. And here's the thing, it's made of worms. It even fires worms. But it stings like you wouldn't believe.
So the group decides to have Fuko stay at Nagisa's house. The anime portrays her parents as being completely oblivious to the whole situation, despite being acquainted with Coco, and letting her in no questions asked. But the game has them act a lot more skeptical. It's a subtle change in characterization that I don't mind too much, because the point of both versions is to familiarize you with how willing these two are to help out someone with very little regard for how much it will impact their own lifestyle.
Sanae, お前も人のことは言えねえだろう。あの日から泣いてねえ。
よく知ってますね。
当たり前だろ。俺様を誰だと思ってんだ。
Akio and Sanae are such good people, man.
Jeez.
The infestation has begun. Quick, call FEMA. FEMA can't help you now, sexy boy. I'm gonna see these stars in my sleep, aren't I? Thus, we establish something of a routine for the story. The group hands out carvings. Tomoya engages in less than chivalrous behavior.
私が岡崎です。女になりました。
Some of the stuff in this show is so out of pocket. Like, what can I even add? Alright, can't forget the level up.
同じ顔、岡崎さんが3人に。
どこまでボケるんだよ。
In the game, a lot of scenes like this are just Tomoya and Fuko, sometimes with the inclusion of Nagisa and Sunahara, but the TV show makes an effort to include a lot more of the other cast members in them, a change that I generally prefer and have a lot to say about. But we'll get to that when the time comes to talk a lot more about Nagisa. But in this scene where Sanae is role-playing as a teacher...
Please be normal about this outfit. I'm begging you.
No! I actually like the way the game handles it better. These four share a lot of common ground, as being utterly divorced from everyday school life. And this scene represents the four of them coming to understand what they have in common, in addition to the kind of lifestyle that Fuko has missed out on. So Kyo and Ryo being here throws a wrench into the synergy that this group has. Although it does make the scene funnier.
岡崎さん、見てください。私の最新作。
She was right. The government can't solve this problem. I gotta do this myself. Clearly Fuko's not gonna be any help. Alright, can't forget my level up.
しかもなぜか喉が潤ってます。
よっしゃ、今度は成功だ。
岡崎さん、
By this point, Fuko's Starfish evangelism has become something of a notable topic among the student body. A sizable number of students have even come together to form a fan club? This probably comes off as a strange aspect of the story to the uninitiated, but it's something of a trope for heroines in high school romance visual novels to develop a following with or without the knowledge of the character in question. Now it's time for the moment of truth, the Founders Festival. If Coco and Fuko meet each other, it should put a stop to all this ghost girl business and set us back on track. Good thinking there, bud. Along the way are various school festival themed shenanigans like getting the cast to dress up as maids, and this. Something, 5 Freddy nights. Now people that were 12 in 2015 will watch the video. Would you believe me if I told you this was intentional foreshadowing for some pretty heavy story details in the next arc? Oh sweet, that song I mentioned in part 1 is playing. This is Mitsui, a tertiary character from Fuko's route that didn't even have a character sprite in the game. We saw her before now, when Fuko tried to hand her an invitation, but she refused, and pretty rudely I might add. But since then, Fuko's stocks have risen considerably, and she's a lot more receptive to the idea. It's really nice to see Fuko's pure-hearted sincerity beginning to reach through to people, you know? She really is just a sweet little girl whose only wish is to see the person she cares about most united with the people she loves. Speaking of which, here she is, so let's put this whole thing to rest.
だからさっきはほっとしたんです。お二人を見かけて。二人？
Well, this leads to some pretty unpleasant implications, doesn't it? But at the very least, Tomoya manages to convince Coco to go through with the wedding, in spite of the current situation.
もしよかったら私のお姉ちゃんの結婚をお祝いしてもらえませんか？ブヒ、了承ですか？ありがとうございます。
I just gave at least one person a lethal dopamine rush by including that scene in the video. And that person is me. I've been dead all along. It's time to wake up, Samuel. At the very least, in spite of the unorthodox circumstances surrounding Fuko's whole existence as a being in our realm, Yusuke and Coco seem dead set on getting married now. So, assuming there are no unfortunate changes in the status quo, things should work out for the best, right? And it sure is nice of Coco to inform the duo of how the current situation came to pass. Astral projection notwithstanding, of course. Fuko is not a naturally outgoing person. Even when the opportunity is presented to her, she struggles to break out of her own shell. Her sister, as her only family, worries about her and does what she can to try and coax her to make new relationships. She goes as far as to ghost her during her last year in middle school, hoping she'd fill the void with other people. On Fuko's first day of high school, apparently aware of her sister's concerns, she boldly declares that she'd try and make friends with new people. Which in turn informs us how she managed to get to know Mitsui, if only briefly. But that's when the accident happened. Take it away, Akiko! In context, this scene is tragic, but why is it directed with such impeccable comedic timing? Oops, can't forget my last level up. This is one of the jokes that the show and game handle differently. The show is, well, exactly as it appears. But in the game, Tomoe and Nagisa just continue their conversation while Fuko is obliterating Sunahara's skull. Alright, now all we have to do is run the idea of holding the wedding at the school by Komura. Oh yeah, right, this guy's name is Komura. He's got his own ending in the game. We'll go over that later. And we should be good to go. Let's go tell Coco.
先日、妹の容体が変わりました。お医者様がおっしゃるには、もう目を覚ますことはないだろうって。
Oh, that sounds like there could be some compounding issues associated with it. The show actually tones down the scene significantly. In the game, it's explicit that Fuko needs to be put on assisted breathing. Fuko could die soon. After which...
よかったらこれどうぞ。
おい、ちょっと待てよ。下級生が声かけてんのに仕方することないだろ。
So it seems some aspects of the Fuko we know are deteriorating even as we speak. There are some people who have already gotten invitations that don't seem to remember her, and even fewer people are noticing her solicitations in the hallway. Mitsui doesn't just not remember, She can't even see Fuko when she's standing right in front of her, the same way Coco couldn't. But, you know, it's not that bad. Akio and Sanae act the same as usual, and Tsunohara isn't going anywhere. By the way, where is he?
フーコちゃんか。授業サボっていろいろ調べてみたんだよ。でも伊吹フーコは入院中。だったらフーコちゃんは確かめてきていいか。
I guess I should point out another major deviation from the game. By this point in the visual novel, Nagisa has gotten sick again and is largely out of commission until the credits roll. This detail is omitted from the anime largely because it wants to use the extra time to let Tomoe and Nagisa spend more time together. It's better for what the show is going for, and because of the way the story is structured here. But in a vacuum, I prefer the way the game handles it. It allows Tomoe to get fully invested in Fuko's story on his own rather than being shackled to anyone else. Whereas in the show, it feels more like Tomoe is just shadowing Nagisa without getting all that wrapped up emotionally. In addition, you miss out on this utterly heartbreaking scene where Nagisa joins the growing horde of people who have forgotten Fuko.
とっても大事なものをなくしてしまった気がします。
Speaking of which, things aren't looking good by now. Tsunohara doesn't remember anymore. After paying her a visit in the hospital, Tsunohara seems to have forgotten. And the Fuko Defense Association is no more. I'll be real, from here on out, there aren't really any more goofy vignettes to go through. It's pretty much all serious business now. Except for this one thing, of course.
こんなのお前向きじゃん。
お誕生会のセットですね。
フーコ？
ふーちゃん？あ、すみません。思わずそれをかぶっている自分を想像してしまいました。
Thanks, Clannad. I forgot what I was playing for a second. But there's no escaping the reality of the situation.
チーズ。あ、
どうかしましたか、お父さん。
いや、今お前たちの間に女の子が立ってたような気がしたんだよ。今朝からずっとこうなんだ。
お母さん。おかえりなさい。渚、岡崎さん、風子ちゃん。今夜も一緒にお風呂に入りましょうか。ねえ、風子ちゃん、渚も一緒に仲良く。お母さん。
This scene is a real standout to me, both in the game and the anime. There's a lot here to appreciate on repeat viewings. It establishes the way these two characters have a very self-sacrificing attitude. Tomoya really has some good people in his life, even if he doesn't fully recognize it. Here is the last scene that's changed pretty drastically by Nagisa's presence. In fact, there's an opportunity to change the entire tone of the story depending on the decision you make. Look, if you want to live your life like this, I'm not going to stop you. But I'm pretty sure I'll be happier if I just keep things the way they are. The sleepover at the school is another highlight of this route in the anime too. I like how Fuko tries to get Nagisa and Tomoya to bond more, as if she knows how this whole thing has to end. Which is fair, pretty much everyone knows that the two of them are on a one-way trip toward each other. Did you know this one frame of animation got some poor dude fired from his job? If you know, you know. Well, we knew this was coming, right? But it still hurts to see. It's even worse in the game, because, remember, Tomoya is totally alone here. He doesn't have the drama club as an excuse. He's just there, by himself, with the vague understanding that something terrible has happened. The situation isn't hopeless, though. Everything they did still happened. Everyone still has their invitations, and thanks to Kimura, the wedding's still on.
誰か結婚するのか？
不思議なことを聞くの。これをよう見て思い出してみ。
コウコさん。
伊吹先生、岡崎さんに伊吹先生を紹介したのは私だと思います。でも私たちのことをつないでくれた人が。風子ちゃん。
そうだ、風子。お前。
風ちゃん。
This show feels so good to watch, man. There's something inherently satisfying about how this story resolves conflict. It feels great to see all of Fuko's efforts come together into something worthwhile, and it all culminates in this.
岡崎さん。いつか風子が話した岡崎さんの夢、覚えてますか？
夢？
人手祭りの夢です。風子が一人で浜辺で遊んでたら、岡崎さんが手を引っ張ってくれました。一人で何やってんだ？今日は人手祭りだぞって。岡崎さんと渚さんに出会ってからは本当にそんな毎日でした。いつも楽しい場所に フーコを引っ張っていってくれて、毎日がお祭りみたいで、とても楽しかったです。ありがとうございました。フーコ、楽しかったです。
Alright, I need to break the flow of narration to elaborate on something here. The song playing right now is called The Place Where Wishes Come True. We've heard that phrase before, but what's the significance here? Is it literal? Is the school courtyard the place where wishes come true? Well, I mostly associate this place with Sunahara having his skull caved in, but put this away in your back pocket for now, because we'll come back to it. Or maybe I'm just spewing nonsense. After all, if this song was so good, where's the place where wishes come true too? No way I can say that with a straight face.
The place changes and goes like a wind, like clouds, like the traces of the heart. おめでとう、お姉ちゃん。いつまでも幸せに。ずっと幸せに。
This is such a strong note to end on. Plain and simple. Whatever supernatural force brought these events to pass, if it does have a will of its own, seems to want whoever it interacts with to find some degree of happiness, whatever form that may take. Both versions of the story close the curtain with a short flash forward to show that even though Fuko might still be asleep, the people here still remember something. A sweet little girl who, together with her closest friends, gave someone the happiest day of their lives. Continued in part 3.